Everything you were told about screens and your kid's brain might be backwards. Researchers in Finland tracked 260 children for 8 years. They expected to find damage. They found the opposite. You have heard the warnings 1,000 times. Less screen time, more outside play. Every hour on a tablet is an hour stolen from a developing mind. It sounds obvious. It sounds like common sense. And for years, nobody thought to actually check it against the data, not over a long stretch of childhood, not with real cognitive testing at the other end. So a team at the University of Jyväskylä decided to check. The study is called PANIC, which stands for Physical Activity and Nutrition in Children, and it has been following the same group of Finnish kids since they were 6 to 8 years old. Researchers measured how much they moved, how much they sat, how much time they spent in front of screens. Then, 8 years later, when those children had become teenagers with an average age of just under 16, the researchers brought them back in and tested their brains. Learning, attention, working memory, the exact things a screen is supposed to erode. The doctoral researcher who led the analysis, Jyväskylä, told Inc. that this was the most surprising result his team found. The teenagers who had accumulated more screen time across their childhood did not score worse on the cognitive tests. They scored better. Not the same. Better. Why would that be true? You would expect the opposite. A tired, overstimulated brain, dulled by hours of passive scrolling. That is the story you have been told since your own kids were born, maybe since you were a kid yourself. But the study did not measure passive scrolling. It measured total screen time, and total screen time is not one thing. It is thousands of different activities wearing the same disguise. This is where the twist actually lives. Jyväskylä's team found that physical activity, at least the kind tracked by heart rate monitors and movement sensors, showed no clear relationship to cognitive performance at all. That is not a small detail. For years, the assumption in child development circles has leaned the other way, that movement builds brains and stillness stars them. Here, in a rigorous 8-year dataset, movement barely registered. Screens did. Think about what that means for a moment. Somewhere in your head, screen time and stillness have probably been fused into one bad habit. But your brain does not experience a screen the way it experiences a couch. A child solving a puzzle on a tablet is not sedentary in the way a child watching static is sedentary. The body is still. The mind is working. That distinction is the whole story, and it is exactly what Jyväskylä pointed to when explaining the result. The type of screen activity, he suggested, is likely the real variable driving the association, not the raw number of hours. Digital activities that involve problem-solving, creativity, or active thinking may be doing something very different inside a developing brain than digital activities that only ask a child to watch. You already know this intuitively, even if you have never put it into words. Think about the difference between a child building something inside a game, negotiating rules, planning 3 steps ahead, versus a child watching an endless feed of 15-second videos, one dissolving into the next before a single thought finishes forming. Both count as screen time. A stopwatch cannot tell them apart. A developing brain can. This is not a new idea in psychology, even if it has taken this long to reach screens specifically. Decades of research into cognitive development, going back to work associated with psychologist Lev Vygotsky, has pointed to the same underlying principle. It is active engagement, not passive exposure, that builds a child's mental architecture. A brain that has to predict, decide, and adjust is a brain doing reps. A brain that only receives is a brain resting, whether the thing arriving is a cartoon on a screen or a cartoon on a page. So the Finnish study did not really discover that screens are secretly good. It discovered that the question itself, how many hours, was the wrong question all along. It is a little like asking whether food is good or bad for you without asking what the food is. Calories are not the whole story. Neither are hours. There is a second layer to this study worth sitting with, and it involves something researchers did not expect either: sex differences. In girls, the data showed that higher amounts of light physical activity across childhood predicted better working memory in adolescence. In boys, it was structured, guided physical activity, the kind with a coach or a coordinated routine, that predicted the same benefit. Two different paths, same destination. Jyväskylä has been careful to say that this is complicated territory, that more work is needed before anyone draws firm conclusions about why boys and girls responded differently. But even that caution tells you something. Nothing about a developing brain is one size fits all, and a study built to be simple ended up being anything but. None of this means unlimited scrolling is harmless, and Jyväskylä himself was careful not to hand parents a free pass. His argument was never hand over the tablet and walk away. It was that the blanket idea of screens as poison does not survive contact with real, long-term data. The nuance matters more than the headline. A child who spends hours a day passively consuming short, fast-cut content is not living the same childhood, cognitively speaking, as a child spending the same hours inside something that asks them to think, build, or solve. This actually lines up with something researchers have flagged for years about media pacing specifically. Fast-paced content, the kind edited for constant novelty, has been associated in earlier work with shorter attention spans immediately afterward, at least temporarily. Slower, more deliberate content does not carry the same cost. So even within the category of screen time, pace and structure seem to matter as much as content. Here is where it gets personal, because you've almost certainly already run this experiment on your own family without calling it one. Think about the difference in your child's mood after 20 minutes of a fast, chaotic video app versus 20 minutes of a slower game that made them stop and think. You have seen both faces. One looks glazed. The other looks lit up, a little proud, maybe already narrating what they're going to do next. That difference was never really about the screen. It was about what the screen was asking of them. This reframes something else too, something that goes beyond parenting and into how you think about your own habits. Adults fall into exactly the same trap, treating all screen time as interchangeable, feeling guilty for an hour spent reading, researching, or building something digitally, as if it belonged in the same category as an hour lost to an algorithm optimized to make you forget you were ever going to put the phone down. Your brain knows the difference even when your guilt does not. Active engagement at any age is doing something. Passive consumption is doing something else, and it is not the same something. The panic study is not the final word on any of this. Jyväskylä and his colleagues have said as much themselves, calling for intervention studies that could actually test cause and effect rather than simply observing a pattern across 8 years. Correlation is not causation, and a smart researcher says that out loud before anyone else has to ask. But the pattern itself is hard to ignore, and it lands as a genuine surprise precisely because it contradicts a story almost everyone has been repeating with total confidence for over a decade. So the next time a screen goes on in your house, the useful question is not how long. It is what is actually happening behind the glass. Is a mind sitting there, waiting to be fed the next 15 seconds? Or is it working, deciding, building something it will remember making? Everything you were told about screens in your kid's brain might be backwards, and the data from Finland suggests the real story was never about